How do you think the richest black women's basketball coach lives? She wakes up every morning in a 6,000 square foot Columbia mansion, has a bulldog named Champ at her feet, and a $25 million coaching contract is sitting in her back pocket. I'm talking about Dawn Staley, the highest paid coach in women's college basketball history. But the house, the money, the titles, none of that is actually the most interesting thing about her. So what is it? Let's get into her ultra-luxurious empire and find out. The teaser. What kind of woman builds this? Let's set the scene properly before we get into the details, because Dawn Staley deserves that much. We're talking about a woman who grew up in a Philadelphia row house where opportunity felt like something that happened to other people, who was told repeatedly she was too small to lead at the highest level. She somehow went from scrapping for recognition in a neighborhood where basketball was survival to carrying the American flag at the Olympic opening ceremony in Athens. But here's what makes the Dawn Staley story different from your standard rags-to-riches sports narrative. She didn't just build a career, she built an institution. The University of South Carolina women's basketball program under her watch has become one of the most dominant operations in college sports. I'm not just talking about women's sports, I'm talking about all sports. 3 national championships, multiple perfect seasons, a fan base that sells out arenas and treats game day like a religious experience. And most importantly, a coaching contract that broke every ceiling in women's college basketball and put her salary in the same conversation as men's Division I coaches who've been earning that kind of money for decades. But pull up to the iron gates of her Columbia estate, and what you find inside doesn't match the expectation of what a $15 million net worth and a historic career are supposed to look like. There are no gold fixtures, no imported marble, and no ostentatious display of anything. What you find instead is a home that feels exactly like the woman who lives in it. Deliberate, warm, quietly powerful, and completely uninterested in proving a point to anyone who happens to be watching. That tension between the scale of what she's built and the restraint of how she lives it is the whole story. And to understand it properly, you have to go back to where it started, because nothing about Dawn Staley's life makes sense without Philadelphia. North Philly, where the foundation was poured. Dawn Staley was born on May 4, 1970, to Estelle and Clarence Staley, the youngest of 5 children in a modest row house in North Philadelphia. Her father did part-time carpentry work. Her mother kept the home. 5 kids, 1 house, a neighborhood where the streets had their own curriculum, and the lessons weren't always the kind you wanted to learn. If you grew up in that environment and came out the other side with your character intact and your ambition sharpened rather than dulled, something had to carry you through. For Dawn, it was basketball, and the values her parents built into her before the game ever got its hands on her. The court became everything. Not because she was running from something, though the neighborhood gave her plenty to run from, but because she was genuinely, ferociously good, and she knew it, and she wanted to see exactly how far that could take her. Her ball handling was surgical, her defense was suffocating. Her court vision at an age when most kids are still figuring out which hand to shoot with was the kind of thing that makes coaches do double takes and quietly call other coaches. By her senior year at Merle Dobbins High School, she was the National High School Player of the Year. A girl from North Philly, 5 feet 6 inches of controlled intensity, had dribbled her way into national headlines before she was old enough to vote. And she was just getting started. At the University of Virginia, Staley didn't just play basketball, she redefined what a point guard could be at the college level. 4 NCAA tournaments, 3 Final Fours, National Player of the Year in 1991 and 1992. A CC Female Athlete of the Year twice. She graduated as UVA's all-time leading scorer and the ACC's all-time assist leader with 729 assists, a number that captures something essential about who she is as a competitor. Someone whose instinct is always to make the people around her better rather than to accumulate individual glory. Her 454 steals were an NCAA record at the time, which means she was simultaneously the most generous and the most dangerous person on the floor. What followed Virginia was a professional career that took her across continents before the WNBA even existed as an option. Italy, France, Spain, Brazil. Staley played and absorbed and evolved, and by the time the WNBA launched and drafted her 9th overall to the Charlotte Sting in 1999, She arrived as a fully formed basketball intelligence in a relatively young league that needed exactly that kind of anchor. But here's the part of her playing career that still gives people chills when they think about it. The Olympic resume. Gold in 1996, gold in 2000, gold in 2004, 2 world championships. And in Athens at the 2004 opening ceremony, Dawn Staley walked into Olympic Stadium carrying the American flag for the United States delegation, the girl from North Philly who was told she was too small, chosen to represent an entire nation at the biggest sporting event on Earth. If you're looking for the moment that defines who she is before the coaching era even begins, that's probably it. The pivot, from player to builder. Here's a truth about elite athletes that doesn't get discussed enough. Being great at the game and understanding how to teach the game are 2 completely different skills, and history is absolutely littered with transcendent players who became forgettable coaches because they couldn't bridge that gap. The reverse is also true. Some of the greatest coaches in history were average players who understood the architecture of the game better than anyone around them. Dawn Staley is the rare thing, someone who was elite at both. She accepted the head coaching position at Temple University in 2000 while she was still actively playing professional basketball. Think about that for a moment. She was coaching a college program during the day and suiting up as a professional athlete during the season, building 2 careers simultaneously because apparently one wasn't challenging enough. Within a few seasons at Temple, she had transformed a program that nobody was paying serious attention to into a genuine contender. 6 NCAA tournament appearances, 3 Atlantic 10 tournament titles. The fastest coach in women's college basketball history to reach 100 wins. She left Temple in 2008 with a record of 172 wins and 80 losses. And even then, the Philly fanbase felt the departure like a loss of something irreplaceable. South Carolina was the next chapter, and it did not start the way the story eventually ends. She walked into a program that was struggling, in a conference that eats struggling programs alive, and she did what she had always done. She outworked the room. The SEC is not a forgiving environment for development. It's a conference built to expose weakness. And the early years at South Carolina had real growing pains that tested everything Staley had built into herself since those North Philly courts. But the Philly mentality she always talks about isn't a catchphrase. It's a specific kind of stubbornness that refuses to let difficulty become a reason to lower the standard. By 2014, the Gamecocks were ranked #1 in the nation. By 2017, they had their first national championship in program history, and Staley had become only the 2nd African-American coach ever to win an NCAA women's title. The program she had built from struggle was now a benchmark that every other program in the country was measuring itself against. What followed 2017 was not a cooling off. It was an acceleration. Multiple SEC championships, consistent Final Four appearances, a perfect season, a 3rd national championship. And as the head coach of Team USA, she led the national program to Olympic gold in Tokyo, adding another layer to a legacy that was already stacked higher than almost anyone in the history of women's basketball. 7 SEC Coach of the Year awards, 600 career wins by February 2024, and a reputation among her players, her peers, and the basketball world at large as someone whose influence extends so far beyond wins and losses that the wins and losses almost feel like a footnote to the larger story of what she's building. The Columbia Estate, where power lived quietly. Pull up to Dawn Staley's home in one of Columbia's most sought-after neighborhoods, and the first thing that registers is how intentional the restraint feels. Tall iron gates, mature trees framing the property, landscaping that communicates care and order without screaming for attention. The house sits on a half-acre corner lot and covers nearly 6,000 square feet, which is a serious amount of space by any measure. But the way it's designed and decorated suggests someone who wanted room to breathe rather than room to impress. 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and an interior that prioritizes comfort with the same discipline Staley brings to a game plan. High ceilings that make every room feel expansive without feeling cold. Custom moldings and plantation shutters that filter South Carolina sunlight into something warm and specific. Every finish chosen carefully, nothing overdone. The kind of space where you immediately understand that the person who lives here has both the taste and the restraint to know when enough is exactly right. The kitchen is where the personality of the home really comes through. Granite countertops, custom cabinetry, dual ovens, and a large island that opens into a bright breakfast nook. This is clearly a space designed for people, for gathering, for the kind of easy Sunday morning energy that a woman who spends most of her professional life in high-stakes competitive environments genuinely needs as a counterbalance. She hosts fellow coaches here, former players who have become family, close friends who show up for the kind of real conversation that doesn't happen in press rooms or locker rooms. The formal dining room carries what you might call Southern tradition with actual substance behind it. Polished wood, elegant lighting, family photos that anchor the space in something personal rather than performative. The library is lined with custom-built shelves holding coaching manuals alongside faith-based books, which tells you everything you need to know about the two forces that have shaped her leadership across every chapter of her career. She didn't build this room to look intellectual. She built it because she actually uses it. Outside, the backyard is where the design opens up and exhales. A pool that catches Carolina sunlight in a way that makes the whole property feel like a private retreat. A fully equipped outdoor kitchen with a built-in gas oven, a primo ceramic grill, and a wood-burning fireplace. Because when you've spent decades in high-pressure environments, the ability to cook outside on a Saturday afternoon with people you love is an actual luxury that money can purchase but intentionality has to maintain. There's a half bath tucked neatly under warm wood-paneled ceilings, an electric infrared heater ensuring the outdoor space stays usable year-round, and enough room to host the kind of gatherings that don't make it to social media because the people attending them don't need an audience. Before this property, Staley lived in East Columbia in a 5-bedroom home covering 5,361 square feet. Pool, media room, 3-car garage that sold for around $885,000. The upgrade to the current estate wasn't about status. It was about space and permanence, a physical statement that she isn't passing through Columbia on the way to somewhere else. She chose this city, this program, this community, and the home she lives in reflects that commitment in its bones. The contract. What breaking ceilings actually looks like. Let's talk about the money directly because this is one of those situations where the numbers carry genuine historical weight and deserve to be treated as such rather than just cited and moved past. In January 2025, Dawn Staley signed a 5-year contract extension with the University of South Carolina worth $25.25 million, running through the 2029-30 season. The deal includes a $500,000 signing bonus and annual raises of $250,000, with a base salary sitting at approximately $4 million per year. That made her officially the highest-paid coach in women's college basketball history. Not by a small margin, but by a number that announced itself clearly enough that the entire sports world noticed. Now here's the context that makes that number mean something beyond the figure itself. For most of the history of women's college basketball, the salary gap between men's and women's coaches at comparable programs was so wide, it functioned as a standing institutional statement about whose work was considered valuable. The coaches building the women's game from the ground up, recruiting, developing, winning at elite levels, they were doing all of that while earning fractions of what their male counterparts collected at programs with lesser results. Staley's contract doesn't close that gap entirely across the sport, but it moves the reference point in a way that will affect negotiations at programs across the country for years to come. When the highest-paid women's coach in history earns $4 million annually and is mentioned in the same breath as men's Division I coaches, the ceiling moves for everyone below it. The contract also includes a performance incentive structure that rewards exactly the kind of sustained excellence Staley has made her baseline. She earned $250,000 for reaching the 2025 Final Four, with another $250,000 available for a national championship. In peak seasons, those incentives push her total annual earnings comfortably past $4.5 million, which means the university is essentially paying her more the better she does. A structure that aligns perfectly with someone whose competitive drive doesn't require external motivation, but responds to it anyway. Her current net worth sits at approximately $15 million, which reflects not just the coaching contract, but the full arc of a career that has been generating income across multiple streams for over 2 decades. The number is significant. What's more significant is that she built it without ever chasing it as the primary objective, which is the kind of financial story that's actually worth telling. The brand: how Dawn Staley became a market force. Now, here's something the sports world has understood about Dawn Staley for a while now, that the broader cultural conversation is only recently catching up to. She isn't just a great basketball coach, she is a genuine brand, with the kind of authentic market power that companies spend decades trying to manufacture and almost never successfully do. Her endorsement portfolio includes Nike, Coca-Cola, and Aflac, among others. And those partnerships generate somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million annually. But the number undersells what's actually happening, because the value of a Staley endorsement isn't purely transactional. When she appears in a Nike campaign or promotes an Aflac initiative, the audience receiving that message has spent years watching her build something real with an integrity that's been publicly tested and publicly confirmed. That's a different kind of credibility than celebrity reach. It's the credibility of someone whose actions and stated values have matched consistently enough that people actually believe her when she speaks, which is exactly what brands are paying for and almost never actually getting at scale. Her podcast, NetLife, extends that credibility into long-form conversation, giving her an audience that connects with her thinking rather than just her achievements. The guests she pulls: NBA icons, cultural figures, people operating at the intersection of sport and broader social influence, reflect the range of her actual intellectual world rather than a publicist's strategy for relevance. Combined with motivational speaking engagements, sports commentary appearances, and USA basketball coaching stipends, the media and speaking layer of her income adds another $100,000 to $300,000 annually. What's particularly interesting about the commercial side of Staley's profile is that it's been built almost entirely on substance rather than spectacle. She hasn't manufactured controversy to stay relevant. She hasn't chased viral moments or built a social media persona designed for engagement metrics. She just keeps winning and keeps speaking with the kind of directness that the internet occasionally tries to turn into a controversy and consistently fails to, because the substance behind the words is too solid to pull apart. That's a rare position to be in, and it's worth more to brands with long-term thinking than any amount of follower count. The faith, the privacy, and what the empire is actually for. There's a version of the Dawn Staley story that ends with the contract number and the championship count and calls that the legacy. But the people who've actually been paying attention know that the most interesting thing about her isn't the scale of what she's built. It's the clarity of purpose underneath it. Faith is not incidental to who Dawn Staley is, it's structural. She's spoken about it consistently across her entire public life, not performatively, but as the honest explanation for how she processes both the wins and the periods when winning felt far away. After the 2024 National Championship, a perfect season, the pinnacle of everything her program had been building toward, she stood in front of cameras with the confetti still falling and said simply, "First and foremost, I thank Jesus." Not a prepared statement, not a media-trained deflection, just the most natural first response of someone who genuinely means it. That faith shapes how she leads, how she treats her players, and how she thinks about the purpose of everything she's accumulated. The mansion in Colombia, the historic contract, the endorsement portfolio, none of it exists in her framework as the point. It exists as the byproduct of doing the work right, for the right reasons, with the right people around her. That's a subtle but important distinction, and it's one that players who've come through her program consistently reference when they talk about what made her different from every other coach they've encountered. Her personal life she guards with the same intentionality she brings to everything else. Rumors have circulated over the years, stemming largely from a 2018 tweet in which she joked that she and longtime associate head coach Lisa Boyer were like an old married couple, a lighthearted comment that the internet grabbed and ran with in the way the internet does. Both women have been clear that their relationship is professional and platonic, built on mutual respect and a shared obsession with building something great at South Carolina. Staley's response to the speculation has essentially been to ignore it and keep working, which is probably the most on-brand possible reaction. Away from basketball, she remains a die-hard Philadelphia Eagles fan. The kind of loyal that shows up to practice in a jersey during the NFL season, because Philadelphia doesn't leave you just because your life took you somewhere else. That connection to where she came from isn't nostalgia or performance. It's identity, the same identity that drives the foundation work in Philly, the same identity that informs how she talks to her players about what it means to come from somewhere difficult and use that as fuel rather than excuse. What Dawn Staley has built in South Carolina is extraordinary by any measure you want to apply. The wins, the contracts, the cultural influence, the philanthropic infrastructure, the careers she's launched for players who've gone on to professional success, carrying her fingerprints on their game. All of it adds up to something that will outlast any single season or contract or championship banner. She came from a Philadelphia row house with everything to prove and nothing guaranteed, and she built one of the most respected programs in the history of American sports by refusing to compromise on the things that mattered and refusing to pretend that anything other than excellence was acceptable. That's the South Carolina Empire. Not the mansion, not the contract, not the trophies, though those are all real and all earned. The empire is the standard she set, the institution she built, and the generation of coaches and players and young women from difficult places who are watching her and learning, the way she once watched and learned, that where you start doesn't have to be where you end up. That's what $25 million looks like when it's been earned the right way. And if this kind of deep dive into the lives of the most powerful and inspiring figures in sports is what you're here for, subscribe to Black Status, and we'll keep bringing it. See you in the next one.